All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Sri. Welcome to the partner call. Here's some interesting updates coming up, including a very new capability on how to remediate compliances. And Shiva will be sharing more about that. So, Shiva, with that, over to you.
Thanks, Srikanth. Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's having a good time, and I guess basically quite a few of the folks will be at the IT Nation Secure, which seems to be one of the security events that everybody goes to. And as I said, we have our booth in IT Nation Secure. If you want to stop by, please do stop by. And also next week in Packside Beyond, we will be there, and we will essentially kind of do this. This week, basically, I'll go through some product updates, and then I'll also introduce you to somebody new who has basically come on board. And I really would like to kind of take this opportunity to basically kind of have you look at how you're expanding in terms of how we can be valuable to our partners and our thought process on the whole thing. So while we do that, let me just quickly go through some of the product updates that we have. One of the things that essentially we had was that while you have master credentials, and then there were certain conditions where people wanted to add very specific credentials for individual assets, especially for SNMP credentials. So the ability to add or update SNMP credentials basically has been provided, and you can essentially choose SNMP V1, V2, V3. So it's an extension of the credentials capability, but SNMP capability is also being added was something we've done now because this is the request that has come now, basically, especially in certain compliance requirements and compliance this thing. These are coming up, and that's why people are asking for it. And so we've essentially kind of added this. We basically added new reports. So the basically risk score by assets, basically that document is now available, which has all the risk scores in terms of what was the risk score at the time of the first scan, and basically what is the risk score at the time of the latest scan. So this way, what happens is that you're able to kind of demonstrate to the user whether the status is getting better, or is it basically kind of getting worse or getting better. So hopefully it is getting better. And so this way, these reports will help in terms of telling you what was there last month versus this month. Second is that we also basically have when did we basically find this vulnerability first on? And when did we scan this particular vulnerability for? That basically field is there. So essentially, you can now compute in your Excel spreadsheets as to how long a particular vulnerability was open. So this essentially is also kind of a feature that was asked for, and so we added it. Again, if you remember, in the last week, we essentially kind of have started looking at backup software and essentially kind of looking at whether all your assets are protected by backup software. Now, we also basically added this back into the reports, basically in the security report card and other places, so that you can essentially look at this. There are a couple of things that essentially came up as we basically rolled this feature out, right? So there were a few of you have asked us essentially the ability to essentially kind of go in and essentially mark a particular asset as backup not required, right? So basically kind of have exclusion rules around backup. Now, the only thing which I would essentially say is that if you are going to a particular customer, and if he has an asset and he tells you that this particular asset does not need to be backed up, I believe that basically we should create an exception process for it, and you should get sign off from the customer before you essentially kind of exclude it from the list that you're essentially showing the customer. Because if, for example, there is data loss on that particular machine, then would he hold you liable or not liable is something that is not going to be clear if this particular process is not followed. So so while this was basically brought up, so one of the things that we are essentially trying to implement is essentially kind of a suppression rule, where you can essentially say suppress any backup reports for this particular asset. But just as we do with suppression of vulnerabilities, it essentially will still show up, but in the reports, you can essentially choose to kind of suppress that data. However, we believe that you have to get sign off on that. So there will be a separate report which says, these are all the assets on which backup software is not installed, but essentially has been suppressed, so that it basically becomes a compliance issue that we are not basically kind of hiding under the carpet, but rather we are basically, it doesn't get misused. So this is basically how we are planning to implement that particular piece. Your feedback on this will basically be very useful. So if you folks think that's the right way to do it, then we are basically in the process of just implementing that. And again, here also in the compliance summary, you have the backup software. And then essentially you have also in the security report card in the Excel spreadsheet, which is there. The other thing which we've done this week is Kaseya apparently has a newer version of the API, which basically has a different set of security permissions, and how you configure the entire security roles, etc., is basically completely different. And then there is the older Kaseya BMS, which was existing. So right now we are rolling out the Kaseya V2 integration, and that is what we're calling it right now, but we'll basically find a better name for it. But essentially this supports the newer API of Kaseya. And so you can use basically this to create the tickets, and essentially this has the ability to restrict people to certain locations, etc. So when you use this particular credentials, they can essentially get only the locations that are marked by those the things that are accessible under that location. That's the basic idea behind this upgrade that has been done. But we've kept the existing Kaseya integration as is, because if people have not upgraded, they still can essentially use the existing Kaseya integration. Okay. So the same thing, it's basically kind of what is the username, password, and domain, and all of the tenant names, and then the company mapping screens and all of that stuff. Now, the next one is essentially compliance remediation. So last week I showed you basically a screenshot of how we were planning to deliver compliance remediation on top, essentially to download it on a for each kind of CIS or whatever it is. What we then figured out is that basically, like when you apply the remediation for one standard, it actually pretty much covers all of these standards. So what we've done right now is basically created one compliance remediation page where by operating system, we are essentially going to give you the GPO policies right now. We are also basically in the process of creating what is called local policies, which you can apply on standalone computers which are not connected to AD. And these essentially will help you kind of have templates to very quickly basically remediate anything that you have, which is basically non-compliant. We've tested it in our labs with these GPO policies. So these GPO policies do work, and it is basically attested by us. So again, the same thing. So one of the things that we wanted to understand is that one of the things that happens with GPO policies is that when you download it, basically it looks at it as a risk. So one of the things which we plan to do is we'll basically sign it and give it to you. But then when you upload it, you essentially have to you have to import it from that machine. We have given you instructions in the documentation on how to do it. So we are basically in beta with a couple of customers who are basically trying it right now. And once they do it, we'll be basically rolling it out for all the operating systems that are in there. And similarly, we'll be rolling this out not only for Windows operating systems, we are rolling it out for Mac, and then basically for Cisco devices. The primary devices that we'll be rolling this out for is Cisco ASA and any Cisco iOS devices, basically templates to basically fix those. So those are basically some of the templates. Those will be configurations. They will not be GPO policies, but basically standard configurations that if you add into your system will essentially make it compliant to these standards. So that's essentially what we are working on. Then last week, there was basically like we introduced the custom domain a couple of weeks back. And then at that point of time, one of the things that a lot of you came back to say that when I first log in, what essentially is happening is that I'm going to my custom domain fine, but then I'm having to essentially, I'm getting a login page, and in the login page, essentially, I'm not seeing my custom logo and custom this thing. So essentially, now you have a white labeled page with the white label logo, which is set, and a direct signing without them to having to enter their custom domain name once again. So essentially, this becomes a direct access to the login page. And so it's also branded in your name. So this way, what happens is that when you have your custom domain, you have a fully white labeled page and everything. We basically are also exploring whether we can essentially remove this by connect secure also, so that you can essentially kind of have this fully white labeled. We will just get basically permission from legal, and we'll basically get this removed probably shortly. Now, coming to the next announcement that I wanted to very quickly make. On this call today, we have a new person who's joined Connect Secure. His name is Krishna. Krishna Kumar, basically, he comes with almost like 25 years of experience in terms of working with various industries. His past has been, he has worked with IBM, and then after working with IBM, he worked with a lot of organizations, basically primarily in the sports complex and basically with FIFA and other organizations. And he basically kind of has a whole bunch of certifications that he comes with. So he basically can look at all of these verticals, which is technology strategy. He does a lot of cybersecurity advisories, security audit and audit support, and basically compliance and GRC advisory, right? Now, the things that he basically comes to fore with is he basically is like, he has all of these certifications and he's a certified auditor for a whole bunch of certifications. Now, the reason that we have Krishna on board in the company is basically, one is as a CISO for the company itself, where he is basically looking at all our processes, etc. And as you know, we are already SOC 2 compliant. We already have the HIPAA compliance, which is done. And now we are essentially ISO 27002 compliant, and we are getting the certification by the end of next week. So from a certifications perspective, we've kind of gotten there, and we are essentially going to use Krishna to essentially also get FedRAMP certified. So the reason we are moving into FedRAMP certification is because a lot of you basically deal with federal projects, etc. And if you want to basically use this tool as part of that, then it is better that we get FedRAMP certified. And also it is to give everyone the confidence that we have all the tools, processes that are required for a large company, so that you can essentially deploy it with confidence. And it's not basically something that is looked upon as something that a startup is doing, and basically we do not know what's happening inside. So that's the reason we're being very transparent about this. Now, what Krishna also basically is chartered to do is basically two things, right? One of the things is that there are lots of questions surrounding compliance, and what do we do for this compliance? How exactly do we work this compliance? And a lot of times I see these questions which come into support, and our engineers are not qualified to basically answer them directly, because they look at it from a technical perspective, right? So they look at it from this registry key or that registry key, etc. However, I think what will be needed is basically kind of somebody who can essentially answer questions on how do you achieve a certain compliance. Like, so for example, I want to be HIPAA compliant. Well, I can give you the GPO, that essentially will go and lock up a whole bunch of things. Once it locks it up, you may have to create exceptions. Now, when you create exceptions, how do you basically go about documenting those exceptions, and how do you essentially get it to pass an audit? So that is essentially what is required in the whole scenario. And in order to take care of that, we've essentially brought Krishna on board. Krishna basically is reachable at this email ID, which is krishna@connectsecure.com. And I would encourage anyone basically who has any questions in terms of compliance, how to essentially achieve compliance, and you want him to come and help you with achieving compliance at a particular company. All of that essentially Krishna will be helping you with, right? And basically, again, please remember that this is something that we are doing because we want to help the MSP community basically kind of get secured and compliant, and help your customers be compliant. So it is not something that we are basically creating a charge for, or basically saying that so much of time, etc. Please feel free to contact Krishna, get him onto any calls where you have basically compliance requirements, and Krishna will work with us to essentially kind of see any requirements that you may have. If it basically requires improvement in the tool, he will essentially help us drive this improvements in the tool. So that way, what happens is that we have very clear charters. I can essentially drive technology and basically bring the product to the fore, while Krishna will basically help the partners succeed with all of their initiatives, whether it be compliance or vulnerability management or explaining to customers, and basically give feedback back to us in terms of what enhancements are required in order to essentially move this forward. So Krishna, can I request you to basically kind of just introduce yourself and basically say a couple of words?
Hi, Shiva. Hi. Good morning, all. Shiva, thank you for the introduction. So it's very exciting to see so many partners who have joined the call, and I've seen the way Connect Secure as a product, CyberCNS as a product has grown. It gives me a lot of excitement to be a part of the team. And moving ahead, I look forward to interact with you all and deliver value to the customers jointly along with the partners. So that's, thank you so much. Thanks for the intro, Shiva.
So yeah, Krishna, welcome on board.
Thank you,
Sure,
Sri.
quick questions. So you want to just quickly keep an eye on chat. Douglas has a question that a customer sign-up has been requested often. Can this concept be considered for all vulnerabilities and not just backups? Do you understand the question, or should we request Douglas to chime in?
Yes. So we are basically creating a workflow, which essentially what will happen is that whether it's a vulnerability, whether it is, so this is basically part of the new UI that, okay, so the schedule is that next week, Krishna will essentially talk about compliances and what compliances are all about. So it's going to be an education session. The week after that is essentially going to be the demonstration of the new user interface and the new features, and the new reports, all of those pieces. So as part of that, with the entire workflow for essentially when you basically come in over here and say that these are all the exceptions that I'm taking, you have the ability to essentially create a workflow where it says, send this to the customer for approval. And the customer will get an email where he'll get a link where he can essentially click on that link. And then he basically says, yes, these are the exceptions that I'm aware of and I approve. And in that, you can essentially add notes also saying that these are against each of them, you can add notes. And these notes will essentially be saved along with the customer approval. And this will essentially be made available in the reports too. So that's essentially the complete workflow we are creating. So this is, so what you're saying, Douglas, is perfectly right. In fact, we've seen your tickets, and then based on your feature request is how we have basically kind of designed this, okay? In fact, it's not, Douglas, your tickets were there, plus there were almost like 6 or 7 other folks who basically requested for this. So thank you all for kind of getting us on this path.
Awesome. Next question, will it be possible to suppress an application baseline rule at some point?
Yes. So anything that basically you can suppress a remediation, you can suppress a vulnerability, you can suppress anything that essentially comes up as a notification. For example, Azure AD, users not logged in for 30 days. All of these are essentially coming in the new UI as part of basically your what is a unified remediation plan. And in that, you can suppress everything that is out there. You can basically say this user didn't log in for 30 days. That's okay. We understand that, but that account needs to be there. So down to that level, every action in this basically can be essentially suppressed.
And is that available today, or is that something that's coming?
That's coming basically as part of the new UI release.
Okay, so just to make sure we're on the same page, we've, and I'll try and be brief, but we've created some application baseline rules where on a per customer basis, we look for particular applications like Duo or a particular version of ESET or antivirus, I should say. And then remediation plans are built for devices that lack these as an install process, but there are occasionally times where we don't want that particular product installed on a particular system, and you can obviously suppress a patch or something like that, but today's interface doesn't allow you to suppress a remediation that involves the installation or the removal of a product. But you're saying that that's coming?
That's coming, yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
All right, so Tom has a question. Can we get the compliance remediation for Azure AD?
Yes, that's coming as part of the unified remediation plan that we are putting together.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Chris. Is there anything for Intune policies? Is Chris's question?
We have not yet done the Intune policies, but I think basically once we make the release, the new release, within 2 or 3 weeks of that, we can do the Intune policies.
Got it. Yeah, so Adam, I already replied that Jason has and will continue to be our
there's a question about the Veeam. There was a ticket also which I noticed. The point is that for Veeam, we are building a specific integration to the backup product. I already said there's going to be a plugin, right? So that plugin will essentially bring back all the systems under protection under Veeam, and then we'll map it back to the assets that are there, and then essentially mark it up as whether it's backed up or not. But that essentially is at least 3 weeks away right now. So that basically is not covered in the current backup list. but essentially is coming as part of the release, which is 3 weeks away. Chris, there was a question. Yes, remove the bike connect as well, please. So I did not understand that. So Craig,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was there was a comment about removing the logo because right now it's kind of a more of a co-branded environment instead of a white label, and removing that would finish the white label process. So I was just more or less making a thumbs up that you guys are doing that already.
would you be looking to do the same with Unitrend's backup? We have 7 backup vendors which are basically being looked at right now. One obvious, the ones that are there, which is Datto, and then enables Cove, then Unitrends, then basically there is Axient, and then there is Veeam, and then of course there is I think VMware's own backup. So 7 of them basically initial run, and then basically based on feedback from various customers, we'll essentially kind of integrate with other vendors. Okay. So pretty much, I think we're caught up with all the questions. So folks, as I said, basically, if any of you are basically there at the ConnectWise event, please basically drop by our booth, and basically, even if you are an existing customer, we would like to kind of at least see you and basically shake your hands. And if you're basically there in Packsite, both me and Srikanth will be there in Beyond. We'll be happy to basically meet you in person. Again, thank you all, and basically we'll catch up with you next week, which will be a session by Krishna, and the following week is essentially the demo of the entire new product, and basically we would look forward to your feedback during. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.